lot of people have asked me for my opinion on the situation with Rich Strike at the Kentucky Derby with the Pony Riders' handling of him. And initially when I saw this, I was pretty appalled because from the clip, it wasn't as easy to tell that he was biting the pony. So it looked like the pony rider reacted out of nowhere, which is what I think a lot of people from watching it live were thinking. So I do understand the outcry because it does look harsh. However, after seeing the photos and closer up videos of Rich Strike biting at the pony rider and the pony, it's pretty clear that the pony rider needed to get him off of him and his pony as soon as possible for safety purposes, because biting can be very dangerous and young stallions can even try to mount or climb onto ponies, and also biting in general just hurts. With that said, I would say it would probably be a good idea for pony riders to use shoulder guards and also chaps and guards on their own legs for this purpose. The pony riders at our little local track do this as well, and they deal with a lot less stallions than what you would be seeing at these big stakes races like the Kentucky Derby. I don't think it's fair for people to call for the firing of this rider because he was keeping himself safe. Now, what I do think is that we need to address the elephant in the room, which is why we see these behaviors in such high prevalence in racehorses. I saw a lot of people talking about this and remarking on the fact that Rich Strike was just being a dick and it's just because he's a colt or because he's a stallion and he's acting steady. And I think that misses the mark on actually discussing why these behaviors present themselves. And this isn't to say that stallions aren't more likely to nip or try to mount at horses. Yes, they're more likely to engage in mouthy, nippy behaviors, especially young stallions when they're teething and when they're learning how to deal with the abundance of hormones that they have. They are more likely to be mouthy than a gelded horse or a mare, for sure. However, the reason why we see this level of overstimulation and desire to keep biting is due to a surplus of nerves. Going in front of that level of crowd at the Kentucky Derby and being around that many horses is a very different environment than what the vast majority of horses are used to, even if they're race horses and even if they've been transported around to go to different racetracks. It is a very loud and busy environment because it is such a huge, important day in the racing world. So the environment alone could result in a horse being so overstimulated that they grab and nip at stuff. And that's a very normal behavior for young boy horses to engage in when they are stressed. So I don't think that this is just the horse being a dick, and I think that labeling it as that completely misses the point, and it fails to exemplify why these behaviors exist in higher quantities in certain industries. Also, what I think needs to be talked about is the fact that these young racehorses, especially in North America, the vast majority of them are stalled 24/7 when they are at the racetrack, other than when they're training or going for walks or being groomed, etc. They could get out of the stall, but they have very little autonomy where they actually can interact with the environment and have choice to move around and go where they want, because the only place they really get to do that is in the stall, which is small. So with that in mind, we have horses who are not getting the 3 Fs, friends, freedom, and forage. They're getting one of those, which is forage. Most of the racehorses have constant access to forage when they're in their stalls, which is great. But they're not getting friends or freedom. So the level of stress associated with missing out on those vital needs causes these disordered behaviors to occur in much higher instances. And if the management issue at the racetracks was addressed, and if they tried to make more of an effort to allow for paddock turnout even for these horses, or to start to build barns differently so horses could see and interact with other horses easier, or at the very least have more space to engage in natural behaviors and interact with their environment, we would see a huge change in the prevalence of these types of behavioral problems, because instead of bringing a young stallion directly from his stall to the paddock, then onto the racetrack, you would have a horse that could be coming from already being outside, already being able to self-exercise, already being able to have relatively normal social skills, then going onto the racetrack and still probably being nervous, but it wouldn't escalate to the same point because you're not having as many triggers stacking. So I think that talking about this issue without addressing the whys behind why we're seeing this behavior misses the mark. But I also think that it's not fair to blame this on the outrider, because he has absolutely no say in how the horse is handled. He has absolutely no say in the management. He is literally just there to do his job and get the horse safely to the gates on that particular race day. So blaming him is not fair. And I also do think that when you're in pain pain and you're panicking and you're in a busy environment like that, it is very easy when you're looking from a third person view to look at someone and criticize their every decision and think that they overreacted. But then when you look at the fact that he was getting bitten all over his arms and legs and that his pony was having chunks taken out of his neck, you can see why in that type of situation you might have a reaction that is not how you would typically react in a more predictable situation. And you might react more fearfully or more quickly to try to get yourself immediately out of that danger. So if this was a situation where the outrider was doing that to the horse when he was not nipping or doing anything, I absolutely would think this is excessive. And initially that I did think that, because I did not notice the fact that he was biting in the clips that I saw because they were taken from so far away. But now that I've seen the photos of the bite marks and what actually happened, I can't in good faith blame the outrider for this, because it's very easy to talk about how much better you could have handled something when you're not directly in that situation, being bitten and potentially climbed by a young stallion in the middle of a huge field before the Kentucky Derby. Like, that is a really crappy situation to be in, so I feel very bad for that rider. And the behavior itself is not the fault of the outrider. Now, what I would ask is, like, whether or not the jockey or the connections of this horse warned the pony riders about this horse's behavior, because if they didn't, I think that is pretty irresponsible, because apparently this horse is just a biter and this is not an abnormal thing for him to do. So if they were aware of it and they did not let anyone know to give them a heads up, I think that's very unfair and irresponsible to put people in that position when they don't know what they're getting into. And like, with that said, outriders and pony riders, they're very good at their jobs. They're used to handling horses who are difficult to handle. So it's not to say that these riders are not equipped to deal with this type of thing, but having a heads up is the difference between stopping a problem before it really starts and realizing that the problem is there because it has started. So getting that warning, I think, could have solved some problems if it wasn't given. If the outrider already knew, then that's irrelevant. With that said, like I said before, I think that it would probably have been a safer decision to wear leg and neck guards for like leg guards for the rider and a neck and shoulder guard for the horse. Lots of outriders and pony riders wear those for this exact purpose, and it would have at least made them a little bit safer in the moment and less likely to sustain damage from that horse biting them. So yeah, like, I think the actual issue here is not really how the outrider handled things. It's the factors that lead up to people feeling the need to handle things like that. And those factors are largely related to management and training and band-aid fixes for a lot of behavioral issues rather than addressing the underlying cause for such behavior. Like, even the prevalence of lip chains in the racing industry and how commonly they're used for basic procedures, like even just grooming horses and leading them around the barns and whatnot. The fact that those are such a necessity for safety for humans to handle a lot of these race horses is a sign that the management and the general handling of these horses needs to change, because we're producing horses that cannot be safely handled without using excessive force and leveraging pain in order to get them to comply with you. And again, I've worked at the racetrack. There's a lot of horses that I've worked with at the racetrack and like hot walked that I would not want to lead without a lip chain for my own safety, because they would definitively get away from me and I don't want to get kicked in the head or have a loose horse careening around the racetrack. However, I am not going to lie and pretend that a lip chain is a kind thing to use and that it doesn't cause discomfort or pain. I'm not going to mislead people about the manner in which it works. And also, in my own training practice where I have more control over the management and care and training of the horses, I would not use a lip chain unless it was like necessary for a veterinary procedure. I would work on the reasons that would cause me to think that I needed something like that in order to manage my horse's behavior. And I think that's kind of the direction we need to start going, because it will make the riders and handlers of all of these horses so much safer, and it'll make the horses so much more easy to deal with. And like, with the sheer amount of horses I have gotten off the racetrack, the difference in their personality and temperament once they go out and actually get to start being a horse and having access to like even just paddock turnout, like not even group field turnout, it is an immense behavioral change. Huge. And so with that in mind, like, it's pretty clear what the major contributing factors are to a lot of these behavioral problems, and I don't necessarily know the best solution to feasibly fix them within the current structure of the racing world. However, just general knowledge and discussion of how to make the situation better is a good place to start, because I do believe that even with the racetracks that are currently standing, that there are things that could be done in order to make the horses' lives better and reduce the level of stress that they experience. And again, like I've said this before, I'm not anti-racing, but it does need a lot of change. And honestly, one of the most pressing welfare issues within the racing industry, in my opinion, is the management. It's not the breakdowns. Like, not saying that's not a problem, but the most pressing issue is the management, because allowing these horses to live more natural lifestyles would also make them less prone to injury. Like, there's a lot of study that links turnout time and time spent out, and like more turnout time reduces the risk of soft tissue injuries. So not only could changing the management improve the rate that we like the rate of injury to lower it, it could also address a lot of behavioral problems that cause injury, because also a lot of injuries to riders, or if not all of them, are usually caused from behavioral issues or horses doing something unexpected because of what like an underlying cause. Additionally, for the horses, they can injure themselves if they behave erratically and move around in a way that is not safe, because when they're reacting and they're above threshold and they're just in flight mode, they're not necessarily thinking of keeping themselves or their riders safe. So this makes them more prone to injury as well. So addressing the management situation and also talking about the elephant in the room and being honest about why we see so many of these behaviors in racehorses and horses who are stalled more in general, I think that's very important, and I think it's something that we need to do to be honest with ourselves. And I know I'm going to have a lot of race trackers that come on here and either comment and tell me I'm a dumbass and that I know nothing because I've never trained a racehorse or held a training license at a racetrack. But what I have held is an education in equine behavior and equine science, and I've read a lot of studies, and I haven't allowed myself to continue deluding myself for the entirety of my life into believing certain things about horses that have been disproven just because it's easier for me emotionally. I've had to do the hard part of recognizing potential problems in equine behavior and potential situations that I contributed to with my care of them, and addressing that and being honest with myself. So while I have not trained racehorses, and I might not have a Kentucky Derby winner in the barn, and I've not galloped at Churchill Downs or ridden a race on a Kentucky Derby prospect, I know enough about equine behavior to talk about like what I think is acceptable and what I think isn't, and what I think the underlying causes are of these issues, because I've also galloped at racetracks. I've handled a lot of racehorses on and off the racetrack, and I've been able in doing that to address certain causes of their behaviors and their tension and their disordered behaviors in stalls, and actually try to fix that, be it at the track or afterwards. I am trying to problem solve within the situations that I like with the means that I have. So at the racetrack, when it's not my horse, I can't help them to the same degree that I could if they were in my barn, but I'm still considering the whys behind why they behave a certain way. However, even with me at the racetrack, with my beliefs and how I think horses should be handled and cared for, if I'm riding a horse who is behaving dangerously and is going to injure me, in that situation, I would react in whatever way I think is best to keep me and the horse as safe as possible. And that is kind of what I think that Outrider was doing in this situation. So it's easy to judge when you're not in those situations, and I don't think he's to blame in this situation, because he has no say in the actual underlying factors that would result in these behavioral issues. Like, he has no say. He's literally just like the messenger. He's just the dude who takes the horse to the gates. He has nothing else to do with the horse. He doesn't know the horse well. He's not involved in the daily care and maintenance of the horse. It has nothing to do with him. So the horse's behavior is not his problem. Well, it is his problem in that situation, but it's not his fault. And all he can do in that situation is keep himself safe. So blaming him and trying to call for Churchill Downs to fire this guy, not fair at all, because he had no say over what caused this danger to him and his horse. And in that type of situation where you don't know what the horse is capable of, you don't know the horse well enough, and they're just biting the crap out of you and your pony, you will do whatever you think you need to do to stay safe in that situation. And that's what he did, even if it didn't look good on national television, and even if it wasn't the most ideal or kindest way to handle things in the best circumstances. all you can do is do what you can in the moment, and it's very hard to react perfectly all the time, especially when you're in fight or flight mode and are panicking in such a busy environment. So I encourage people not to blame the outrider. If you're going to blame anyone, talk about the management of these horses and what actually contributes to their behavior, not the guy that is just the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. He is literally just doing his job, and he drew a shitty horse and had a shitty time. So if anything, feel sorry for him because he got the crap bit out of him and his pony, and he probably did not know the full extent of what he was getting into when he picked up that horse. So anyways, we already know there's a ton of link between behavioral issues in horses and poor management, and also certain types of training. Like very punishment-based training and high-stress training typically results in more conflict behaviors and more disordered behaviors. There's extensive research on this with horses and other animals, and the trends are very similar across all different types of species. So we know this to be true. And since we know that, there's not really any reason to try to frame this as anything it's not, as far as I'm concerned. As someone who's handled stallions and youngsters and has had a horse that was like literally the same age as Rich Strike, basically, and was ponying him also, Banksy. Banksy wasn't always perfect. He would sometimes try to play and climb horses when we were ponying, but we addressed that and trained it out of him and like meticulously managed his environment to minimize those behaviors. But I guarantee you, he would have been a total tit if he was stalled 24/7, and if I just brought him out into a big environment like that, he probably would have done the very same thing, and it's colty behavior. But the reason why it hasn't become a lasting issue with him and why it's not something that would escalate to that degree is because of how he's been handled, managed, and trained. And again, like nippiness is more common in horses before they are gelded, and I noticed that with him initially, but we also counter conditioned the nippiness and encouraged him to do other behaviors in place of that and showed him what we wanted him to do and how we wanted him to behave. And in turn, that resolved the issue, and nippiness was not an issue with him even when he had bally balls. So like, I think it's totally fixable, and I think that it lets people off the hook and sends all of the blame simply just onto the horse when we talk about these types of things like they're just quirks or just the horse's personality or just the horse deciding randomly to be an asshole one day. Doing that takes all the blame and responsibility off of the people and places it onto the horse, which is not fair, because the horse does not control his management or his training, and his behavior and how he acts in certain environments is the result of that. And yes, genetics do play a certain role, but there is such a high instance of behaviors like this in racehorses and similar behaviors that has no genetic correlation because it's all different bloodlines, that I am inclined to believe that in the vast majority of cases it is management and training based. And I think it's totally fixable because thoroughbreds are excellent horses. They're very intelligent and they're very, very trainable, and they try very, very hard. So I am positive we could at least reduce the number of behavioral disorders that we see in these horses if we made some changes to the management, because we already know how lacking in friends, forage, and freedom affects horses. And we also know that racehorses have a way higher instance of gastric ulcers than other types of horses do. So even just the ulceration can make horses more nippy, especially when you're going out to the racetrack. If they haven't eaten food, which I'm guessing they would probably fast them before the race so that they're not full of hay, they could have acid splash with their stomach acid moving around, irritating sensitive stomach lining or ulcers that are already present. So there are truly so many factors that can contribute to how horses behave in these situations. And I encourage people to consider those factors rather than just taking the easy way out and going, oh, this horse is just a dick. Oh, he's just a bad horse. Oh, that's just what stallions are like. And it's like, no. A lot of the behaviors that we normalize for stallions exist because of how we normalize the keeping of stallions. It is very common to deprive stallions of any access to other horses and also keep them stalled way too much. So I think we see a greater instance of these stud behaviors in stallions because of how they are commonly managed, and that it's not just completely related to the fact that they have balls. And again, like, I can't necessarily speak for that firmly, but I have seen it upheld in practice, and there's also significant studies showing how management and general handling of horses impacts their personality and their behavior. So anyways, that's my thought on this. I do want to reiterate the fact that initially when I saw that video, I was like, what the hell is that rider doing? Why is he shanking the horse? Because from the angle that some of these videos were taken at, it's not clear that Rich Strike is biting. And I think that a lot of the people judging aren't aware of what was actually happening. So I think that it's important to clarify that. And I also think that people need to keep in mind that the outrider has no real say in how this horse is trained and managed and how well he ponies. He has nothing to do with any of that. He did not train the horse to pony. He does not regularly work with the horse. He is just along for the ride. So don't put the blame on him when he basically has no say in anything related to the handling or care of this horse. And all he could do in that situation was keep him and his pony safe. And in all honesty, when that's your job, you're more concerned about you and your pony than you probably are about the horse that's attacking you. And that's who he was trying to keep safe. Could it have been handled better? Maybe. I'm sure watching this back that the outrider could have watched back the clip and picked things that he could have potentially done better. But literally anyone can do that when you're watching something in third person. So it's easier said than done. Don't blame the dude. Don't call for his firing. It's not his fault. If you want to see less of these problems happen, let's address the issues that contribute to why horses act this way so that the people who cannot manage their anger or frustration have less of a reason to get mad at these horses because they'll behave better. And I'm not saying that the outrider is one of those people who cannot manage anger or frustration because he was trying to keep himself safe. It wasn't a frustrated response. It was probably a more fearful response, being like, holy shit, this hurts. I need to get this horse off of me. And yeah, so don't blame that guy, but also don't kid yourself about why we see a higher instance of these stress behaviors in certain disciplines and industries, because they're like being race fit and being fed up on race grain and being a racehorse who is bred and trained to be fast is not a reason to have disordered behaviors and stress behaviors. People are just normalizing that because of traditions and what they have enabled for lengthy periods of time. It isn't necessary. And if anyone wants to buy me a farm and completely fund me entering the racing world, I will show you. But until then, I can't because it's too expensive. I would love to put my money where my mouth is and practice holistic training of racehorses and do things how I think would facilitate sound and happier horses, but that also requires a lot of money and a property, so I can't. But anyways, that's my opinion on the Rich Strike situation. Thank you for listening, and I hope that everyone got something out of this. Also, anyone who's interested, you can check out my Patreon channel if you want to subscribe to it. I post a bunch of tutorials there. I do live Q&As, behind the scenes stuff for product releases and so on and so forth. There's a lot of cool stuff. The subscriptions start at just $1 a month, and there's higher tiers if you want more training help and more access to more tutorials. But I highly recommend it. It's a great way to connect with me, especially if you want to ask like frequent questions, and it gives you a taste of behind the scenes stuff, and it also helps me with funding the podcast and any extra equipment I might need. And also now with like Milo's issues that he's having, the money for that vet care. Also, I have my store, shopmilestoneequestrian.com. You can shop there for my merch, or I have my product line that is exclusively available on amoreequestrian.ca, amoreequestrian.ca. And the milestone tab is where all my products are listed. We just released a new base layer color. It's super comfy, really stretchy. I really like the material. I tried a bunch of different materials before I settled on this one, and this is the first color release, so I highly recommend checking that out. And then also we have bridles available for pre-order. We have some remaining quantities of bridles, and then we're going to have a restock in the next couple of weeks. Things have just been slow because of Ramadan last month, so yeah, we're well on our way to introducing more products. Highly recommend checking it out. I really want to move products because I want to get Milo into the clinic as soon as possible to get his MRI and arthroscopy so that we can figure out what's been going on with him. So I'm trying to move products. Moving inventory is really helpful to me because a lot of my income is currently in inventory, since you have to put so much money into large product orders in order to get them. So that would be a huge help to me. I also have a PayPal tip jar linked down below if anyone is interested in doing that. Or you can check out my Patreon, as I said. And even just sharing my videos, liking my videos, commenting on my videos, boosting my videos is extremely helpful, especially on YouTube, because I do get some ad revenue from that. So I really appreciate it. I really just want Milo to be feeling his best, and I want to figure out what's going on with him, because it is unbelievably frustrating to see him being uncomfortable and have done the amount of diagnostics that I've done with absolutely no leads whatsoever and no signs of what could be bothering him. There is something clearly bothering him. So this is also what I mean about behavior and looking for the underlying cause. I know there's an underlying cause, and I know that cause is discomfort and pain, but I cannot find the source of it. And despite the lack of clinical findings, we know it's there. So we're looking harder. And that's something we need to consider with all types of horse behaviors, like the underlying cause. It's not always going to be pain. It's not always going to be chronic pain. It's not always going to be something that requires intensive diagnosis, like what's going on with Milo, but it requires you to consider why they are behaving a certain way, and it requires the curiosity to want to question, like, I wonder what's motivating this behavioral response. And even just doing that will help better your relationship with your horse, and it'll help keep you guys both safer, because instead of just doing the Band-Aid fix where you're just correcting the behavior itself, you're actually addressing the underlying cause, which then gives the horse no reason to continue exemplifying that behavior. Whereas just punishing the behavior is only correcting that behavior and telling them don't do that behavior, but then they're going to find a different behavior to fulfill the purpose that the unwanted behavior fulfilled. And the new behavior probably is also going to be unwanted. So you're better off trying to play like Sherlock Holmes and figuring out why your horse is doing certain things, rather than just doing the easy thing and just labeling them as being an asshole or making up some own humanistic reason of why your horse is doing something. So anyways, that's my opinion on this situation. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry that I haven't been doing a lot of vlogs or any like really filmed videos or like proper videos where I'm actually doing stuff. But it's just been really busy and stressful, like between Harlow's colic and now what's going on with Milo. It's been very, very hard to motivate myself to want to film. And it's just been hectic. So I appreciate everyone's support, and I really appreciate the fact that people are still consuming my content, even if it's not necessarily the content that they would like to see. So anyways, thank you for listening, and I really appreciate it. You can check out all the links down below in my description if you are interested in shopping any of my products or checking out any of my other pages or checking out my Patreon channel. Thank you guys. Have a good day.